Let's get something clear right away. If you woke up tomorrow morning as a peasant in feudal Japan, somewhere around the year 1460, the first thing you'd probably feel is your back screaming. Not because you slept wrong, but because you didn't really sleep. Not on a bed, not with a blanket, just a woven straw mat shared with two or three family members, maybe a baby, maybe an old aunt who moans in her sleep and smells faintly of pickled radish and decay. Outside, it's still dark. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the rooster has. And in the cold mist of the Japanese countryside, that crow isn't a wake up call, it's a summons. Because time in your life isn't counted by hours or freedom. It's counted by how many buckets of water you carry before your master notices you're slow. Now, before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe, and write a comment about what kind of content do you want to see next. You sit up slowly, bones creaking like bamboo in the wind. You slender clothes, and everyone does. Changing into a fresh kimono in the morning is something that exists in poems, not in huts like yours. You feel around for your straw sandals. One of them is damp with something. You hope it's just spilled water. You slip it on anyway. Your house, if you can call it that, is a single room made of wood and earth, thatch and smoke. Everything inside is brown, the floor, the walls, the rice sacks, the air. Even the light, when it comes, seems stained with dirt. You glance at your wife. She's already moving, quietly feeding the embers from last night's fire. If it's out, you'll have to relight it the old way. Spinning a stick until your hands blister, praying the gods or your grandfather's ghost lets you catch a spark. This morning, you're lucky. There's still some glow in the ash. No one speaks much yet. There's no point. The words of the day are saved for bartering, obeying, or apologizing. Breakfast? Forget steamed rice. That's for warriors or priests. You might get a small bowl of millet porridge, the same kind you've eaten every morning since you were 6. It's bland, gritty, sometimes sour if the jar wasn't sealed properly. If it's been a good harvest year and your landlord wasn't drunk with greed, there might be a sprinkle of dried radish on top. If it was a bad year, well, there's always tree bark, or soup made from boiled grass. Or, if you're truly desperate, that half-rotten daikon your neighbor buried in the mud and forgot about. You eat quickly, squatting, using your fingers. The kids fight over crumbs. One of them has worms. All of them have lice. Nobody bothers checking anymore. Your wife hands you a bundle, your hoe, a cloth to wipe your sweat, a rice ball wrapped in leaf for lunch if the rats didn't eat it overnight, and your hat, a wide-brimmed thing that's half straw, half hoe. It's time to go. You might be thinking, but wait, wasn't feudal Japan all about cherry blossoms and tea ceremonies and noble samurai gazing into the sunset before an honorable duel? That existed, yes, but not for you. You're not samurai. You're not even allowed to touch a sword. You're the one who grows the rice that buys the sword. You are nomin, a peasant, and in the hierarchy of feudal Japan, you exist to sweat, vow, carry, and pay tax. And make no mistake, you will pay tax, even if there's no rice left for your own family. The system is called shoen, and it's as rigid as the mountains. Landowners, mostly lords or temples, control vast estates. You don't own your plot. If there's famine, and there often is, too bad. The samurai still get their cut. If you resist, you're punished. Not just you, but your entire household. You walk out of your hut and into the morning fog. The air is thick with the smell of mud, smoke, and human waste. Sanitation? You dump your night soil in the corner trench like everyone else. It'll be used as fertilizer later. You walk barefoot across the field embankments. One wrong step and you twist your ankle in a ditch. No doctor will help you. There's no coin to pay. And besides, you're expected to work anyway. The field won't wait. You greet a few other villagers along the way. The proper bow, not too deep, or they'll think you're mocking them. Not too shallow, or they'll think you're arrogant. Every interaction is wrapped in layers of etiquette, like rice balls in seaweed. Say the wrong thing, look the wrong way, and you might bring shame to your family. And shame, that can kill. But slowly, socially, with ostracism, whispers, and exclusion from the communal tools, wells, and festivals. In a world where survival requires everyone, being alone is a sentence. Bo, why, bu, poldik, polik, and polik. Why? By the time you reach your assigned plot of land, the sun is up. The sky is blue, but you don't notice. You're too busy calculating how many days you have to finish planting before the tax collector returns. Because he's coming. With a ledger and a sword. And that's just the morning. The house you return to each night is not a fortress nor a haven. It's a single-room structure made of beaten earth, roughly cut wood, and straw. The sort of place that doesn't keep the world out, only slows it down a little. There are no doors, just thin wooden shutters or reed flaps tied with string. The roof is thatched, leaking slightly even in light rain, and the walls are lined with whatever you've managed to patch them with over the years. Bark, cloth scraps, sometimes even pages of discarded temple scrolls if you got lucky. You don't call it your house because you don't own it. The land it stands on belongs to the estate lord. The materials came from the forest, claimed with silent gratitude and occasional guilt. But you built it with your own hands for your family, and in that sense, even if the wind whips through the walls and the cold slips under the tatami mats, it is yours. Inside, the room is dim even during the day. Light enters in streaks, filtered through smoke from the cooking pit and the fine dust always hanging in the air. There are no windows, just gaps between planks. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, ash, damp straw, pickles fermenting in clay pots, and smoke from the irori, the sunken hearth in the center of the room. The fire is rarely extinguished. It provides warmth, light, a place to cook, and sometimes the only defense against illness in winter. Around it, life happens. You eat, talk, mend, argue, grieve, and raise your children within reach of its heat. There is no privacy, only corners. No silence, only moments of quiet when even the wind outside seems too tired to blow. Your wife tends to everything within this small universe. She is the heart of the home and the last one allowed to complain. She wakes before everyone else to stir rice or millet, sort dried vegetables, and inspect the dried fish for rot. She hauls water from the communal well, watches the children, mends clothes, tends a tiny garden outside that struggles to grow anything but onions and burdock. And when her chores are somehow complete, she weaves straw sandals, which she can trade for miso paste or soap when someone in the village is in need. If she's ill, she works anyway. If she's pregnant, she works until the day of birth, and again a few days after. There is no maternity leave in the rice fields. Childbirth happens at home, usually squatting beside the fire, attended by another woman or sometimes alone. No midwife, unless you're lucky enough to have one in the village. If the baby lives, it is wrapped in cloth and laid near the fire. If the mother bleeds too much, there is only prayer. Children don't grow up here. They are grown. There is no phase between infancy and responsibility. A child who can walk can carry water. A child who can talk can answer for mistakes. They learn early to bow, to obey, to stay silent when samurai pass, to avoid the shrine when drunk men linger nearby. They do not play with toys. They play with tools, with rocks, with whatever the older children have carved or found. Education, if it exists, comes from the temple and only if the boy is lucky and his family is unusually respected. Girls are taught to cook, clean, and fear dishonor. If a daughter shames the household, by being seen alone with a man, by refusing an arranged marriage, by bearing a child out of wedlock, the consequences range from ostracism to death. That may sound cruel, but in a village of thin margins and long winters, shame is considered contagious. One scandal can bring ruin upon 10 homes. hygiene is a daily challenge. Bathing is done sparingly, usually in a river or with warm water boiled over the fire and ladled from a basin. Soap exists, but is precious. Lice and fleas are accepted as part of life. Teeth are cleaned with sticks. There is no toilet, just a trench behind the house, shared by the family and maybe the neighbor's pig. Illnesses spread fast in the tight, damp quarters of the home. A cold can turn into pneumonia. A cut can fester. A stomach ache can signal something much worse. There are no doctors. Maybe the village has a healer, a woman with knowledge of herbs and prayers, but she cures more by intuition than by science. Temple monks may offer medicine in exchange for rice, but mostly they offer incense and sutras. Death visits often, and when it does, the body is wrapped in cloth, placed on a wooden board, and burned, if wood is available. If not, burial in a shallow grave under a pine tree will do. Despite all this, the home is not joyless. There is laughter, sometimes, around the fire when stories are told. There are songs, short word chants, and lullabies, passed down from mother to daughter, that speak of moons, cranes, and the hope of a kind harvest. There are seasonal festivals, small but meaningful, where rice cakes are shaped and sake is shared. There is the comfort of touch, of a wife rubbing her husband's sore shoulders, of a grandmother brushing lice from a child's hair, of siblings huddling for warmth. Love does not come with flowers or poetry here. It comes with presence, with staying, with not giving up when the food runs thin and the wind gets sharp. And above all, there is duty, not just to the Lord, but to the family. Every action you take is weighed against how it reflects on your bloodline. If you dishonor your role, your family suffers. If you succeed, quietly, humbly, your children may one day live with slightly fewer bruises. Maybe they'll get more rice. Maybe one will become a monk or marry a village leader's child. These are the dreams you allow yourself while lying on your side, staring at the beams of your roof and listening to the fire crackle. This home may be fragile, made of mud, smoke, and rice straw, but it is the center of everything you fight for. It is the only place where you are not a servant, a laborer, or a tenant. Here, you are just a father, a husband, a son. And that, in a world where your worth is often measured by your yield, is perhaps the only dignity left untouched. There comes a day every week or two, depending on the estate, when the rhythm of rice planting and fire tending is interrupted by something different. Not a holiday, not exactly a rest, but a market day. On that day, assuming no flood has swept the road away and no brigands stalk the forest path, you wrap your goods in cloth, lift your pack, and walk. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. But the peasant makes the journey because it is the only window, however narrow, into a world where he might trade something he made for something he didn't. The road isn't what you might picture. It's not paved. It's not smooth. It is mud when it rains, dust when it's dry, and a maze of ruts, puddles, and rotting leaves most of the time. You walk it in sandals or barefoot when they rot. You pass by rice paddies, shrines half swallowed by vines, and stone statues with straw hats placed lovingly atop them by travelers before you. You bow to each one. You don't know which spirit watches which bend in the path, and it's best to offend none. You carry your goods, maybe dried fish, straw sandals, bamboo ladles, pickled plums, or firewood bundles, and you rehearse what you'll say to the stallmaster. You need salt, maybe a spool of thread, maybe a handful of barley. If the harvest looks thin, you have nothing to spare. But you'll try to smile anyway. The market is noise. Not loud like a city, but busy. Carts creaking, merchants shouting, chickens squawking, old men arguing over the weight of rice. It is the only place where classes mix, however briefly. You might brush shoulders with a monk from the temple, or a samurai's retainer picking up fabric. You keep your head low and your voice soft. One wrong word, one sideways glance, and a perfectly good day turns into punishment. You remember the boy who got slapped for speaking too loudly near a magistrate. He didn't mean harm, he just didn't know better. At the market, you see things you'll never own: iron kettles that shine, dyes in colors you didn't know existed, knives with carved handles, books with calligraphy too fine to read. For a moment, you dream. Then you haggle for miso and get back to walking. On the way home, you stop at the shrine. There's one on the edge of every village, small, often crooked, roofed with bark or tiles scrounged from older buildings. It's where people leave offerings: bundles of rice straw, paper slips with names and wishes, coins tarnished beyond recognition. The kami, the local spirit, might protect the rice, or simply the village as a whole. No one knows precisely, but no one dares ignore it either. You bow, clap twice, bow again, and whisper a prayer. Not for fortune, you're not that greedy. Just for a steady sun, for your child's cough to fade, for your wife's hands to stop shaking in the cold mornings. Religion in your life is not a question of belief. It is habit, survival, custom. The shrines are part of the land, as natural and expected as the mountains or the wind. There are Buddhist temples too, further off, grander and richer. If you're allowed inside, it's to leave coin and burn incense. The monks may teach your son if he shows promise, or they may just remind you to accept your lot and reincarnate better next time. You're not sure what's more cruel, that promise or the life you already have. Death is a word every peasant knows but never says aloud, because it's a stain. It lingers like the smell of spoiled fish, hard to hide, easy to notice. Sometimes you borrow rice from a neighbor, firewood from the next hamlet over, or tools from your cousin. You promise to return it after the harvest. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you can't. And when the harvest fails, not your fault, never your fault, you fall into the web. Because everything is borrowed: the land, the lords, the shrine, the temples, the rain, the mountains. Your life? It's a loan from the gods, and they collect often. Punishment, when it comes, isn't always physical. It's social. Maybe your family is excluded from the next festival. Maybe your wife is whispered about, and no one lets her borrow water. Maybe your daughter's marriage prospect falls through, and no one says why. You try not to cry in front of your children when you realize what's happened. You try not to complain when the village headman pretends not to see you. You just bow deeper, walk straighter, and yet the same web that can strangle you can also save you. When your house half burned in the lightning storm 2 winters ago, the neighbors came. Them. But enough. They brought wood scraps, extra straw, and some bitter sake to keep your spirits up. No one said much. Just hammer, tie, brush, rebuild. When your third son was born sickly, the old healer woman came without being asked. She chewed herbs into a paste and smeared it on his belly. He lived. Maybe because of her. Maybe not, but you thanked her with what you had: a single egg and a folded paper crane your daughter made with shaky hands. This is peasant life. Fragile, cruel, kind, entangled. You owe everyone, and everyone owes you. You hear news at the market too, though news is a generous term. More often, it's rumor that a neighboring village was raided by bandits, that a temple was burned, that the emperor is sick, that a new tax will be levied on firewood. You nod, listen, and store it away. You can't act on any of it. But knowledge is currency, not for trading, but for surviving. Knowing which tax collector is lenient, which samurai turns his gaze the other way, which path has fewer watchmen. These are things that keep your children fed and your head attached. Sometimes, on a good day, the road home feels lighter. Your back aches, but your hands are full. The sun dips low behind the mountains, painting the sky in orange bands that shimmer like silk you'll never wear. You pass a pond and see your reflection, older than you remember, lined like the bark of the shrine's old pine. Your wife greets you with a nod. You trade your purchases for a handful of pickled roots she prepared. The children eat. You sit by the fire. The village is still. For now, you've done well, which, in your world, simply means you are not yet ruined. The line between survival and collapse in your light is razor thin. No matter how hard you work, how diligently you offer rice to the gods, how obediently you pay your tax, the truth is, you are always one season away from ruin. And everyone in your village knows it. No one says it aloud, because to speak of it invites it. But when the clouds gather the wrong way, when the ground is too wet, or not wet enough, or the summer heat arrives 2 weeks too soon, you feel the air change, and you feel your stomach sink before your mind catches up. Famine doesn't look like paintings or stories. It doesn't begin with skeletons in the streets or begging children. It begins with quiet, uneasy glances at the sky. It begins with a mist-planting window, with rice seedlings stunted from cold, with a strange mold growing in your grain, with frogs vanishing from the paddy. You watch your wife count the storage jars and then recount them, not because she forgot, but because she's hoping the numbers will change if she looks again. Your children get thinner first. Their knees grow knobbly. Their eyes look wider, hungrier. They start chewing bark without being told. You give them your portion and pretend you weren't hungry. Everyone does. And yet, the tax collector comes. He arrives on horseback or by palanquin, sometimes escorted by ashigaru with spears and bored faces. He doesn't care about your failed harvest. He doesn't even ask. He just unfolds his scroll, written in a hand finer than any peasant could ever learn, and reads your quota. If you don't have it, he takes what you do have. If your storehouse is empty, he might beat you, or seize your tools, or demand your daughter, and you'll bow and give thanks that he didn't take your home. Sometimes you borrow from the village granary, but the granary belongs to the Lord too. It is a kindness wrapped in a noose. You owe double next season, if next season ever comes. Then people start to die. They go quietly at first. The already sick, the ones with no family. You find them curled beside their hearths or slumped in the fields, and you bury them quickly, without ceremony, because there is no wood to waste on fire. Funeral guard are full of lumaks. Grief is a luxury. The rest of you go on. Thinner, quieter, eyes darker, movement slower. You stop speaking at meals. There's nothing to say. Fire, too, is a common enemy. Your house, like every other peasant's, is made of wood, thatch, straw, and prayer. One lit lantern, one careless ember, one dried breeze. That's all it takes, and there is no fire brigade. When home burns, the only response is neighbors with buckets, running barefoot, forming lines from the nearest stream, which might be a kilometer away. And sometimes, the best you can do is drag out a mat, a child, an heirloom blade that wasn't worth selling last winter. Then you watch the roof collapse, hear the screaming of animals, and smell the last of your oil and pickled turnips cook in the flames. You sleep outside that night, under the stars, which you don't even notice. Your hands stink of soot, and your lungs ache from smoke. And in the morning, your wife asks if the shrine will let you borrow a nail puller. You nod and rebuild. That's what peasants do. Rebuild now. But of all the disasters, war is the one that leaves no survivors in the mind. Because war doesn't come with notice. No drumbeats. Just rumors that travel faster than carts, that the local daimyo has rebelled against the shogun, or that two clans have decided the road near your village has strategic value. Suddenly, men in armor you don't recognize are riding through your paddy. Sometimes they demand rice. Sometimes they take it without asking. Sometimes they burn what they can't carry. They say they serve justice. You say nothing because your mouth is dry and your children are hiding in the grain bins. Sometimes soldiers leave corpses in the well to spoil your water. Sometimes they leave women carrying children that no one will claim. Sometimes they leave nothing, just silence, as if the village was a whisper that never existed. And in their wake come the bandits. Because where war passes, order crumbles. And in that space, hungry men with blades crawl out of the forests, descend from the hills, and take what's left. They have no lord, no gods, and nothing to lose. And so you hide. You bury your dried radish. You teach your child not to cry when afraid. You remove the family mirror from its frame and hide it under a rock, hoping it will still be there next season. When the bandits arrive, you give them food, smiles, fake laughter. If they take more than you offer, you look away and survive. Or you don't. Afterwards, the shrine is quiet. No one claps twice. No one leaves offerings. Not because they've lost faith, but because even the gods are hungry now. You don't rebuild quickly from war. You don't rebuild fully from famine. You carry the scars forward. You live quieter. You plant more burdock root because it grows in bad soil. You sleep closer to the door. You teach your daughter to bind her chest and your son to speak softly near strangers. You get used to fewer words, longer silences, and hoping that the next disaster picks a different village. And yet, you remain. Somehow, after the storm and the ash and the bad rice, your heart still beats. Your hands still plant. Your fire still burns, even if faint. The world does not care that you survived. But you do. Because in feudal Japan, that's the highest form of defiance available to a peasant. You're still alive. This because alt, because F, B, Pia, B, we teach F, Bia, Pia. You were born beneath someone's boot. Not because you did anything wrong, but because that's where your name was written before you ever cried your first cry. In feudal Japan, class is not an invisible force. It is a cage with visible bars, built from birth, belief, and the brutal weight of centuries. And if you are a peasant, a hayakusho, you know exactly which rung of the ladder you're clinging to, the one just above the dirt. But here's the paradox. In theory, peasants weren't at the bottom. In the grand moral hierarchy imagined by Confucian thinkers and Buddhist monks, the social pyramid looked something like this: samurai at the top, then peasants, then artisans, and merchants at the bottom. Why? Because peasants produced food, and thus were morally superior to those who only traded or crafted. But that was the philosophy, the myth. The reality was different. You were admired in words and ignored in suffering. You were told your work was noble, but taxed until your ribs showed. You were praised as the backbone of the country, but forbidden to own a sword, to read certain texts, to wear colors too rich or shoes too fine. The samurai above you were allowed to cut you down, literally, if they believed you had shown disrespect. What did disrespect mean? It meant not bowing fast enough, speaking too loudly, touching your hat before they passed, or simply looking tired when you should have looked grateful. And so you bowed 100 times a day, to the village headman, to the tax official, to the monk, to the shrine, to the passing merchant, sometimes, just in case he had friends. You bowed even in your dreams. You bowed so much your spine forgot how to stand straight. Your clothing announced your rank before your mouth ever could. You wore coarse, undyed hemp, itchy in summer, threadbare in winter. No vibrant colors, no flamboyant knots. Your sandals were straw, your hat was wide, your sleeves were short to make labor easier. Your posture, your walk, even your silence was part of your performance of inferiority. Because to forget your place, even for a moment, was to invite punishment, exile, or death. Marriage followed this same rigid logic. You did not marry for love. You married for function, for alliance, for rice. Your daughter could not dream of becoming a lady in waiting or a court poet. Her future was one of labor, childbirth, service. If a higher-ranking man, a samurai, a tax collector, a wandering soldier, took interest in her, you had no recourse. Your honor was not her shield. If she resisted and paid the price, your family paid again in shame, in silence, in social freezing. And if she was compliant, it was still your shame, just in a different shape. Education was another little gate. Your sons, if lucky, might learn to read temple script, taught by monks who occasionally deigned to educate bright peasant boys. But even then, the path ended quickly. No matter how intelligent, how disciplined, your child would never rise above his birth without extraordinary favor. And favor was dangerous, because rising above your rank put you in a spotlight. And the moment you slipped, the fall was twice as hard. And yet, strangely, the system functioned, not because it was fair, but because it was believed. The villagers around you didn't revolt every week, not because they were content, but because they had internalized the logic of the order. They believed that the samurai had their place, just as the farmers had theirs, and that disturbing the balance would anger not only the government, but the very heavens. Order was sacred, and rebellion was not just a crime, it was a cosmic error. Still, every few decades, the cracks showed. There were peasant uprisings, usually sparked by famine, taxation, or corruption. You might have heard of one in your grandfather's time, when villagers in the neighboring domain took up hoes and sickles and stormed the estate's storehouse. For a few days, they held the land. They shared the rice. They sang freedom. And then the troops came. The ringleaders were crucified. Their homes were burned. Their sons were made beggars. The rice fields were salted. No one speaks of it now. But your father remembers. And so you plant your rice and lower your gaze. Still, within this suffocating system, there were micro-hierarchies, pecking orders within the village. A family that paid their taxes on time earned respect. A man whose wife kept her mouth shut earned deference. A peasant with 5 surviving children was seen as blessed or suspicious. The village headman wielded petty authority like a miniature lord, deciding who got access to grain stores, who could borrow tools, who was allowed to marry whom. Power in the peasant world was measured in silence. The more others listened when you spoke, the higher you stood. And for all the weight of this system, there was one unspoken truth. Everyone was afraid. The samurai feared their lords. The lords feared losing face in the shogun's court. The monks feared famine. The merchants feared bandits. The peasants feared everyone, but mostly they feared shame. Shame was the invisible net that held society together. It was more binding than chains. If you were shamed, caught stealing, failing to deliver your rice, speaking out of turn, your whole family suffered. Your name could be erased from the village list. You could be banished. And in a world where community was life, exile was a kind of death. So you stayed in your place. You bent your back. You kept your eyes low. You offered your right. You married who you were told. You taught your children the same, because the ladder could never be climbed, but it could always be kicked out from beneath you. To a peasant in feudal Japan, the year is not 12 months, nor 4 seasons. It is a cycle of urgency, superstition, and exhaustion, marked not by dates, but by the behavior of insects, the color of the rice, and the mood of the mountains. No one tells you what day it is. You know it's time to plant when the frogs begin to sing. You know it's time to harvest when your knees ache and the smell of wet grain is heavier than the wind. And you know winter has arrived when your breath is louder than your children's laughter. Spring is not a time of renewal, not for a peasant. It is a season of panic. You must prepare the fields, patch the roof, weed the garden, repair the irrigation ditches, clean the family graves for the ancestral festival. You have less than 40 days to turn muddy flats into organized paddies. The earth is stubborn, heavy from snowmelt, and the oxen, if your village has one, is shared and slow. If not, you break the soil with a worn hoe and a prayer. Still, there is beauty. Cherry blossoms, sakura, bloom like soft ghosts above the village trail. You do not have time to sit beneath them, but you glance up on your way to the fields. Their petals fall quickly, like little white reminders that beauty is always fleeting. The temple bell rings louder in spring. The monks chant for long life. You don't believe in long life, only in long enough. Then comes early summer, when the paddies are flooded and the rice shoots are planted. You bend from dawn until your spine burns, pushing each tender stalk into the mud. You try not to step on snakes. Your children help, barefoot, caked in black soil, laughing at first, then crying when their legs cramp. You shoo away crows, chase away ducks, and mutter curses at the clouds when the rain comes too early or not at all. It is also the season of rituals. At the start of planting, a village priest or elder offers sake and salt to the field kami. A single white paper streamer is tied to a stick and placed near the edge of the paddy. No one touches it. No one jokes about it. It is the line between famine and fortune. A child who knocks it over must bow and offer apology. Or worse, be shaved and sent to the temple for a month. Not because anyone's angry, but because the spirits might be. Midsummer is heat and disease. The water grows thick, the flies come in swarms, and the air feels like hot cloth pressed over your face. You eat less. You sweat more. Babies fall ill with fevers. Old men stop waking up. You fan your sleeping child, not for comfort, but so they keep breathing. At night, your wife whispers that something smells strange near the well, a dead frog maybe, and you go out with a torch, even though you're terrified it might be worse. Then comes autumn, and with it, the only joy peasants are allowed to hope for, harvest. The rice ripens like gold in the fields. If the season was kind, the ears are heavy. If not, they droop half empty, like a broken promise. You cut the stalks with curved blades, bind them into bundles, and hang them on wooden racks to dry. The village smells sweet, the scent of drying grain, crushed grass, and wood smoke. You're tired, but the kind of tired that tastes like victory. Your wife prepares pickled plums and grilled river fish. Your daughter hums old songs while sorting beans. For a few days, there is laughter. Then the taxman comes. You present your share. You keep the best grains on top, the underweight sacks hidden beneath. If he's in a good mood, he pretends not to notice. If not, he takes more. Either way, you thank him and offer tea. Because a rice field without tax is just land someone else will soon claim. After the harvest, the village celebrates the harvest festival, Ninna Mesai, or a local version of it. A simple meal. Children in paper masks. A drum carved from old wood and deer hide. The priest offers thanks to the kami, the elders share stories that may or may not be true, and for one evening, no one works. You sit beside the fire, your fingers stained with ash, and think, we survived. And that's enough. Then comes winter, not a season, but a sentence. Work doesn't stop, it simply shifts. You mend tools, patch roofs, chop wood, collect brush, dry greens, check the thatch for leaks, and hope the snow stays late. Winter is hunger with white teeth. You eat dried daikon, old rice, frozen roots, and the occasional fish caught under the ice. You chew slowly, not to savor, but because the bowl is small. The hearth fire is never big enough. The wind enters through the eaves. The children sleep bundled together like pups. Your wife coughs more at night. You pretend not to hear. Still, there is something else in winter, a kind of peace. The world is still. The night lasts longer. The stars are clearer. You speak less, but not because you're unhappy. You simply learn that silence is warm when shared. And there are stories. Winter is when the old men talk of yokai, spirits and monsters that live in rivers, in forests, in the black space between lanterns. Your daughter listens wide-eyed as her grandmother warns her never to whistle at night, or to point at the moon, or to leave rice uneaten. Not because of waste, but because something always listens. By the time the frost fades and the frogs begin singing again, your body is weaker than last year, your debts deeper, your tools older. But the soil waits, the spirits stir. The oxen snort. And once again, you plant, because the seasons do not ask permission. They only ask that you endure. BAS and they, one today S ent, do come S, do as peasant. One to do live as a peasant in feudal Japan is to live among things that cannot be seen. The world is not just fields and tools, roofs and rivers. It is woven with presences, felt but never proven, honored but never explained. You do not ask whether the spirits exist. That would be like asking if the wind is real. You don't see it, but it moves your roof tiles and chills your back. It carries voices. Sometimes those voices aren't human. This is not about religion in the formal sense. You do not debate doctrines. You don't choose between gods. You simply live among kami, yokai, and ancestors, all sharing your air. It's not belief, it's etiquette. In the corner of your home, above the hearth, rests the kamidana, a small wooden shelf with white paper streamers and a bowl of salt or rice. It is the god shelf, though the name is misleading. It's more like a window, a polite gesture to say, "We see you. Please stay kind." You clean it weekly. You bow before it. You replace offerings before they rot. A spoiled offering invites spoiled luck. The shrine down the road houses a larger spirit, not a god in the Western sense, but a force. Maybe it protects the harvest. Maybe it guards the mountain trail. That's fine. Spirits are hollow. They don't answer to logic. They answer to ritual. If a fox is seen near the shrine 3 days in a row, the village elder calls a small gathering. Rice is let out. A song is sung, not because the fox is feared, but because it might not be a fox. Foxes, after all, are not just animals. They are messengers, tricksters, shapeshifters. Kitsune. Some protect, some deceive. If a child grows suddenly brilliant, people say a fox has blessed him. If a man begins talking to himself or staring into the fire too long, they whisper that a fox spirit might have crawled inside. There is no cure but ritual, no priest but patience. At night, you do not whistle. Everyone knows why. Whistling calls the spirits, specifically the kind that travel on wind and steal things, sandals, warmth, dreams. And you never point at a grave. If you must, you gesture with your chin. Point is rude. It invites attention. You do not want that kind of attention. Children are taught these rules before they can speak clearly. Don't walk through three-way crossroads after sunset. Don't look into a mirror by candlelight. Don't sleep with your head toward the north. That's the direction of the dead. Don't step on thresholds. Don't step over someone sleeping. Don't write the name in red ink. Why? No one explains. They don't need to. One just knows. And those who don't, vanish. The yokai, the mysterious ones, live in the margins. The kawa no kami, the river spirit, is respected but unpredictable. The zashiki, warashi, the child ghost, may live in old storerooms and bring luck, if fed, if spoken to kindly. The tanuki, the raccoon spirit, might shift shape and confuse travelers. You laugh at tanuki stories around the hearth, but when walking home at night and your lantern flickers and the trees feel too close, you stop laughing. Just in case. Illness is not merely biological. A persistent fever might be caused by tsukimono, a spirit that has attached itself to the person. You consult the village's kanushi, or a wandering monk, who burns incense, chants, and perhaps waves a gohei, a sacred wand, over the body. If the fever breaks, the spirit has been appeased. If not, more drastic rituals are considered. Sometimes a child must wear a red cloth. Sometimes a hair cutting is performed. Sometimes a chicken is sacrificed, quietly. Even the weather has moods. A sudden wind from the east after 3 dry days? Omen. A cat seen sleeping belly up during the day? Good harvest, maybe. A crow cawing 3 times outside your door? Illness. Happening means something. To the outsider, it looks exhausting. To the peasant, it's orientation. Without these signs, how would you know which way the world is turning? And then there are the ancestral rites, perhaps the most sacred of all. Twice a year, during Oban and the New Year, your household lights lanterns to guide the spirits of the dead home. You clean the family grave no matter how far. You offer rice, steak, incense, and, if times are good, a bit of dried fish or fruit. You bow deeply. You ask for protection, not miracles. Just survival, ghost, peace. If a storm destroys your roof the next week, maybe you forgot a bow. Maybe your grandfather is displeased. Sometimes you dream of the dead. A grandmother, a child you buried in a bad winter. In the dream, they say nothing. Just watch. You wake up sweating and light a candle. You don't interpret. You don't seek comfort. You just do what needs doing. Repair the kamidana, change the offerings, say your apologies aloud. Because you are never alone. Even in silence, especially in silence. The spiritual life of a peasant is not about control. It's not a religion that bends to your needs. It is a truce between you and the countless invisible wills around you. You don't need to understand. You only need to show respect. The spirits do not forgive arrogance. And the world is full of things older than your name. So you walk softly through the forest. You bow before the twisted tree. You whisper, "Thank you," to the wind when the rain comes. Because you don't know who's listening. But someone always is. You don't marry for love. Not exactly. Love, if it arrives, is something that happens later. A slow warmth in the ashes of duty. In feudal Japan, for a peasant, marriage is an agreement made with the weather, the harvest, the neighbors, and the gods. It's not your dream, it is your next job. The match is often arranged before you can even hold a hoe properly. Your parents speak with another family, maybe 2 or 3 fields away. They talk about rice stores, debt, the sturdiness of the girl's ankles, the reputation of your father, how many surviving brothers there are, and whether anyone in your family has gone mad. If everything lines up, the families nod. A cup of sake is shared. And just like that, you are promised that there is no ring, no grand declaration beneath cherry blossoms. What you might get is a glance across a rice paddy, a brief, awkward smile. Her mother might allow her to bring you pickled plums once during the planting season, but only if her hands are covered and her eyes are low. On the day of the wedding, there is no feast, not unless your harvest was miraculous and the tax collector unusually merciful. There might be soup, maybe grilled eel if your uncle caught one, a little sake shared by both families. The bride arrives in simple white, her head slightly bowed, her sleeves long. She doesn't speak much. You don't either. She sits beside you on the straw mat and listens as the elder recites blessings. You bundle together. That night, you sleep on the same mat, but don't expect passion. Sex is not a performance. It is a function, a quiet, practiced part of marriage. Affection is shown in different ways. When your wife wakes before dawn and refills your rice pouch before you go to the field, that's love. When you patch her sandals before winter, that's love. When neither of you speaks for hours because you're too tired, but you share the last sweet potato without arguing, that's love too. Your wife becomes the spine of the household. She manages food, fire, clothing, children, and community reputation. She knows the rhythm of the pickles in the jar. She senses when the thatch will leak. She remembers who owes your family favors and which shrine to visit when your son's fever won't break. She endures, but her life is harder than yours in many ways. She works just as long in the field, then longer at home. She prays silently for sons, not because she loves them more, but because daughters must marry out. A daughter raised is a daughter lost. A son remains, plows the land, carries the name, bows at your grave after you're gone. If your wife cannot bear children, whispers begin. Some say the ancestors are angry, others suspect a fox spirit. A few blame her directly, especially if the neighbor's wife has given birth twice already. You don't defend her publicly, that would be strange, but you bring her a better root vegetable. You speak her name softer. She notices. That's enough. Childbirth is not sacred, it is dangerous. Midwives are experienced, but not miracle workers. Some births happen in the dark with only straw and cloth. Some women die. Some babies never cry. You grieve quietly. There's work to do. A small mound is raised near the family plot. A stick with a name is pressed into the earth. Still, when a child survives, and many do, the household changes. Your wife smiles more. You build a toy from scrap wood. At night, your daughter hums the harvest song. Your son pretends to be a monk, or a lord, or sometimes you, and you laugh. Not loud, but real. You remember what joy feels like, in moments between the ache of your knees and the heat of the fire. But not all marriages are kind. Some men drink, not often, because sake is expensive, but enough. And when they drink, they hit. Flower they leave, or they shame their wives in front of neighbors. Divorce is rare, but not impossible. It's called mikudarihan, a written notice handed to the wife, usually with the help of a village elder. She packs her bundle, bows, and walks to her family home. If she has no family, she might remarry. The shame follows her. Everyone whispers, especially other women. And then there are quiet affairs. Not often, but they happen. A widow and a young worker. A lonely wife and a traveling priest. But it is dangerous. Rumors destroy faster than fire. A woman caught in adultery may be beaten, shaved, cast out. A man, depending on status, may suffer or swagger. Either way, honor bleeds, and that stain is remembered by the village longer than any rice yield. But despite all this, or maybe because of it, many marriages endure. Not through romance, but through mutual rhythm. Like two oxen yoked together. You till the same field. You share the same blisters. You raise children. You bury parents. You keep the fire going in the same hearth, season after season. And sometimes, when you're old, your wife snores beside you, and your bones hurt, and the night air feels like it's pressing through the walls. You look at her and think, this was not love like stories. This was love like stone. Worn, buried, carried. And, still here, you don't retire. There's no pension, no celebration, no gold coin tucked into a rice cake. In the world of a feudal peasant, aging is simply this. Your back bends farther each year until it stops rising. Your steps slow. Your field shrinks. And the scythe, once your tool, becomes too heavy for your hand. You hand it to your son. He doesn't say thank you. He just takes it. That is, thanks enough. Old age doesn't arrive all at once. It leaves. Your knees start to ache in the planting season. You can't lift the grain bundles like before. You forget which child belongs to which cousin. You wake up in the night not from pain, but from the silence of not being needed. And still, you work. You, sweetheart. You tend the charcoal fire. You patch old sandals. You tell the same story 3 times and laugh before anyone else does. Some of the younger children think you're foolish. That's fine. You remember thinking the same of your own grandfather, before he coughed blood in the winter of the great snow. You're not afraid of death, not because you're brave, but because you've seen it too often. It literally here. It came for your brother when the fever passed through the village. It took your neighbor's baby in the night. It knelt beside your wife's sister as she labored through her seventh child and never stood up again. Death is not a mystery. It is a familiar shape moving behind the smoke. Your body tells you before anyone else does. You sleep more. You chew slowly. The cold bites deeper. You stop climbing the ladder to fix the roof. You sit more often on the steps and listen. You let your son shout now. It doesn't matter. The house isn't yours anymore, not really. Still, there are responsibilities even now. You keep the family altar clean. You chant the ancestor prayers. You teach the children the proper way to bow. You remember which offerings please the local shrine. You know which field stone marks the spot where the kami favors blooms after rain. That kind of knowledge isn't written. It's passed through wrinkled fingers. Your death will not be written down. You are not a samurai. No monk will carve your deeds into wood. There will be no portrait, no poems. But there will be ritual. When you fall ill, and it is always a fall, like a slow collapse inward, the family gathers. They speak softly, argue in whispers. Your wife sits beside you, her eyes swollen, her voice steady. If she is gone already, your daughter brings her shawl and places it on your chest. Not for warmth, for memory. If there is enough money, a priest is called. He chants sutras. He burns incense. He tells you to release your attachments. You already have. Except maybe the smell of the rain in late summer and the sound of your grandchildren when they think no one is listening. When you die, your name changes. In life, you were Taro. In death, you become Shakutaro, the departed Taro. The family burns your body in a cremation pit, or, if poor, buries you in a village plot. A simple stone, a stick with characters, a bowl of rice, 3 sticks of incense. Your son boasts 3 times. Your daughter weeps silently. Your youngest grandchild sneezes and doesn't understand. The mourning period is structured. The family wears white or dull colors. They avoid celebrations. A memorial is held on the 7th, 14th, 21st, 49th, and 100th day. Food is offered. Bells are rung. Your spirit is invited to rest. If they forget a day, well, spirits forgive children, but you do not vanish. Every new year, they bow at the family altar. Your name is read. Your story is shortened. He was kind. He worked hard. He once chased a badger out of the rice shed. Eventually, your great-grandchildren won't know your face, but your name will be inked on a wooden tablet. As long as someone reads it, you are not gone. And even when the name fades, even when the roof is replaced and the altar moved, your hands remain. In the soil, in the tools passed down, in the prayers whispered without knowing who they're for, in the habits that no one remembers how they learned. Because you were not famous, but you were part of the thread, and without you, the weave would loosen. So you rest, not in peace, but in continuation. You are not supposed to leave. The village is your world, your mountain, your shrine, your dirt, your grave. The rice grows here. The spirits live here. Your name is buried here. And beyond the edge of the village, past the last Torii gate and the prayer-worn milestone, lies the unknown, not just in space, but in law, danger, and memory. In feudal Japan, for a peasant, travel is not freedom, just a suspicion. To leave your village without permission from the local official or headman is to risk being labeled a deserter, a vagrant, a criminal. Your feet may carry you forward, but your name stops at the edge of the map. There are road checkpoints, sekisho, where officials demand papers, explanations, bribes. And if you cannot provide them, they can send you back, or worse, send you nowhere at all. Still, people do leave. Sometimes. A boy who falls out with his father. A girl fleeing a forced marriage. A farmer whose crops failed too many years in a row. You hear whispers of someone vanishing at dawn with a travel pack, heading west toward the mountains. Plum return. Molroad. The forest is deep and the law deeper. If you do travel, it is usually not far, perhaps to a neighboring village for a festival, or to the castle town to pay taxes. You walk on narrow dirt roads, flanked by bamboo, watched by monkeys in the hills. You sleep in roadside shrines or under trees. You carry rice balls wrapped in cloth, water in a gourd, and a small charm to ward off bandits. You do not make eye contact with strangers. You speak only when spoken to, and you watch the road, not just for rocks, but for samurai patrols, because the roads belong to them. To the wandering ronin, the loyal retainer, the tax enforcer, the traveling magistrate, the Markalgailai, Hemolgornhat. They can take what they want. They can cut without explanation. The sword is not metaphor. It gleams at their hip, and you are taught from childhood to bow before its shadow. But war is the real terror. You've never fought in one. You're not a soldier. But when the lords clash, when banners rise on opposing hillsides and drums echo from the valley, the world changes overnight. Soldiers need food. Horses need grain. Commanders need space. And peasants? Peasants are in the way. Your rice field may become a battlefield. Your tools may be taken. Your daughter may be borrowed to serve as a cook or servant. Your home may be torched for wood. You hide food in clay jars buried beneath the shed. You paint your door with a charm to make it look cursed. You tell your youngest to cry like he's sick so soldiers avoid the house. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. After the war moves on, the field is trampled, the roof is broken, and the silence left behind is heavier than blood. The local temple burns incense for the dead. The headman compiles a list of missing men and girls. The survivors don't speak of it. They just replant, rebuild, endure. But the world outside is not all fire. There are markets, too. Once or twice a year, a traveling merchant sets up his cart in the clearing. He wears fine robes. He smells like a different kind of life. He sells lacquer combs, salt, cheap steak, scraps of silk, maybe even rare medicines. You barter with millet or eggs. Your wife eyes the combs, but chooses vinegar instead. Your son begs for the paper kite. You buy it, knowing it won't last. But for that one afternoon, the world feels larger. It is not peace. But it is not war either. Some brave villagers become messengers or porters, hired by wealthy travelers to carry goods from town to town. They see rivers wider than your village, bridges made of stone, towns where every roof is tiled. They return with stories. Most are true. Some are impossible. But all remind you that life outside the village continues, fast and glittering, while yours grinds like a wheel made of clay. And there are monks, wandering, dusty, chanting for alms. Some carry drums, others carry scars. They speak of temples on mountaintops, of relics brought from China, of doctrines that promise rebirth. You offer rice, but you do not follow, not because you don't believe, but because faith must fit around your chores. One day, your Lord may pass through. You do not see his face, only the procession, armor gleaming, spears upright, attendants shouting. The village lines the road. You bow until your knees ache. You do not speak. You do not look up. Later, your child asks what the Lord looked like. You say, like a mountain moving past. But the most haunting journeys are the forced ones. Famine pushes people from home. Bandits burn whole villages. A family caught harboring criminals may be expelled, their names scraped from the temple register. They want to plunder. With no land, they beg. With no papers, they hide. With no roof, they disappear. These are the nameless. You pass them on the road and offer nothing. Not because you are cruel, but because you are barely not them. You don't travel because you are afraid. Afraid of the Lord's men, afraid of yokai in the forest, afraid of being mistaken for someone else, afraid of being forgotten. And so you stay. Because your village, with all its hunger, its shame, its back-breaking labor, is still yours. The path outside may lead to cities, or it may lead to nowhere. But this patch of dirt, this mountain wind, this shrine bell, they know your name. And in a world of blades and borders, being known is sometimes the only safety there is. Scrolls of ink-washed generals and noble ladies frozen in silk. You'll read about great battles, hoods, samurai, names carved into wood, praised in song. But in all that lacquered glory, you will not find him, the peasant who bent over his field before dawn, the mother who gave birth in silence, the child who carried water and never asked why. And yet, they are what Japan stood on. This is the hardest truth of history. The closer you get to the people who built it, the less they seem to appear in it. The peasant did not write the laws, but his taxes fed the men who did. He did not lead armies, but his sons were taken to fight. He did not compose haiku, but his breath misted the morning where those poems were born. He stood in the background of every painting, as a dot in a rice paddy, as a shape beneath a straw hat, always there, yet never named. You were told the samurai ruled, and they did, with swords and paper, but they could not grow rice. They could not survive winter without tribute. Their castles were built by hands like yours. Their banners dyed with indigo from your fields. Their robes stitched by your wife's calloused fingers. Their honor funded by your submission. Even their peace depended on your pain. The Pax Tokugawa, that long, peaceful period, was bought not with treaties, but with enforced stillness. You were ordered not to move, not to rise, not to want. And for 2 centuries, you complied. Because the alternative was worse. Because ambition for a peasant was a dangerous luxury. Still, you endured. You didn't resist with rebellion, though sometimes you did, and died for it. Most resistance was quieter, planting rice in secret corners of the forest, trading goods outside the magistrate's eye, naming your child after a banned ancestor, burying family heirlooms before the taxman arrived. You resisted by surviving where no one expected you to. You left no letters behind. But you left soil, tilled and retilled, shaped by your hands. You left customs, bowing, blessing, believing. You left rhythms, the planting songs, the funeral drums, the cadence of prayer riding from the hearth. You left bodies, born, broken, and buried, without nameplates, without fanfare, but placed carefully, facing the right direction, toward the mountain, toward the sun. And even now, when someone visits a quiet village and says, "This place feels old," what they feel is you. They feel the narrow path that never widened. The thatched roof rebuilt the same way for 400 years. The shrine stone rubbed smooth by hands long forgotten. They see a rice paddy shining in the morning mist and think it beautiful, not knowing the backs that bent to make it so. You were called Hyakusho, literally the 100 names. A strange irony, because most of you left behind no name at all. Yet your presence is everywhere. In the language, rooted in the field, the grain, the hearth, in the food, every pickle, every broth, every fermentation born of scarcity. In the manners, the bow, the slipper, the refusal to waste. In the rituals, the respect for seasons, for silence, for something larger than self. You were poor, but you knew what enough meant. You were hungry, but you never fed yourself first. You were unseen, but you never stopped watching. You were forgotten, but you never forgot the earth. And this is the paradox. History forgets you because it cannot survive you. It cannot absorb your unrecorded years, your speechless discipline, your anonymous endurance. So it skips you, makes you ordinary. But you were not scenery. You were the stage. You were the foundation. You were the breath beneath the story. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe greatness was never in the sword, but in the sickle. Maybe heroism was never on the battlefield, but at the river's edge, washing cloth beside your daughter. Maybe strength was not in conquest, but in consistency, in waking up every day to a life with no glory and living it with grace. You were not a legend. You were a father who stayed, a mother who taught, a child who worked, a villager who bowed, a person who persisted, not for fame, not for fortune, but because it was time to plant again. That is why you wouldn't last a day in feudal Japan. Not because you're weak, but because the people who lived that life didn't do it for a day. They did it for centuries, and they did it without ever asking to be remembered.